Welcome back. You're on the newsfeed late night, and your reporting continues now. Every year on the 22nd of April, people around the world commemorate Earth Day. This year, the theme is Restore Our Earth. The Center for Africa-China Studies at the University of Johannesburg is calling on the public to commemorate Earth Day, saying that there is an urgent need to act in ways that will enable the Earth to regenerate itself. For more on this, I'm joined by the postdoctoral research fellow at the University of Johannesburg Center for Africa-China Studies, Dr. Ekemini Echa Okon. Good to have you with us, Dr. Okon. And let's talk a little bit about the Center for Africa-China Studies and what you do and what is your interest, particularly on this commemoration of Earth Day.
Thank you very much for having me, and good evening to your audience. The Center for Africa-China Study is a research hub, and we specialize in conducting research that cuts across different topics that relate to the African continent. We look at the relationship between Africa and China, China as an emerging economy in the world and its heavy role that it plays in the continent. We look at issues around the environment, issues around energy, and of course, tomorrow marks Earth Day, and of course, we are focusing on looking at events and doing activities that would help us commemorate this day. And we are calling on everyone, both staff and students, as well as members of the general public, to join us in commemorating the day.
Yeah. What did you observe, particularly the last 12 months or so, when the whole world had actually shut down? There was not a lot of industrial activity, not a lot of cars moving around, and one would say maybe not even a lot of pollution with airplanes and everything else having to be at a standstill. Did the earth breathe, so to speak?
You could argue that the earth did breathe. I think the earth was very thankful that we took a break from the way we carry out our daily lives, polluting the atmosphere with cars, with air travels. And of course, I mean, when we look at what happened last year, the fact that we went into a full-down lockdown, you could talk about the fact that the earth took some time to regenerate. I mean, it's something that we are calling for, especially with this year's theme in terms of restoring our earth. We need to continue that circle in terms of allowing or doing, partaking in events that allow us to produce as we would. We need these things for development and for human sustenance. But at the same time, we need to do it sustainably in order to give the earth some room to breathe, some room to thrive, and allow the environment to exist for future generations.
How do you press that reset button continually without disrupting economic activity?
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that question. I think one thing we would need to do would be to, incorporate green technologies, incorporate greening the way we live, greening our lifestyle, greening development in order to allow for the environment to breathe. Of course, there's a lot of debates out there in regards to what green means for Africa. There's green technologies, there are startups these days that use different innovative ways in achieving the same goal that would have taken, huge acres of land to achieve previously. And therefore, these are new technologies that the governments need to invest in. We need to encourage more startups to, pluralize and pollute this field in a good way, and allow for us to learn about these new technologies and how to move towards sustainable living in Africa.
Yeah. Sustainable living in Africa, how big a subject is that, and how much attention is paid to that aspect by African governments?
That's a great question. Well, it depends on what country you're referring to in sub-Saharan Africa, to be specific. I think so far Rwanda in East Africa has done a great job in terms of incorporating green energy or green technologies into its development. South Africa as well is up and coming. But there are other parts of the sub-Saharan African region where, there are still more pressing issues that the governments are considering, and therefore environmental issues take the back pedal. Issues around poverty, high levels of inequality, winning the next election, if I should dare I say that, and also being able to provide basic social amenities to their respective constituencies. And these are more pressing issues to most of these countries. However, at the same time, environmental degradation is taking place in terms of deforestation. We're seeing cyclones happen. We're seeing low levels of precipitation rates. We're seeing, high levels of variability when it comes to rainfall. And most of this region are heavily dependent on rain-fed agriculture. So if there is low levels of rain, they cannot produce, and that impacts food security. So these are the issues that are prevalent in most parts of sub-Saharan Africa, and therefore the government needs to act and prioritize environmental issues.
Yeah. There are those with the view that developing countries, right, more than anything else, should be looking at their development, and maybe it's the more developed countries that should be, for example, be a part of something like the Paris Climate Agreement. And they're saying those countries are so quick to want to bring developing countries into these agreements, and those are the things that are limiting the growth of the continent. And what's your take and your view on that?
To a certain extent, they do have a point. However, it doesn't detract from the fact that climate change is affecting the globe, and Africa is predicted to be the worst hit by climate change. And therefore, if you look at solutions that have been brought about, especially in the private sector with startups, there's a plethora of startups, although I don't think they're getting enough audience, enough limelight as they should, but there are so many startups in different parts of the continent that are trying in their own little way to manage the implications of climate change. Like I said, I gave an example of how climate change affects food security. There are so many startups out there that are invested in hydroponics, growing food in an unconventional way, using just something as simple as a Coke bottle or a plastic bottle and just a little bit of soil, or Coke bottle and some water in order to grow food. And these are the types of activities that the government needs to look into and invest in. And I would say to anyone who thinks or who argues that, Africa needs a chance to also dirtily, quote unquote, develop before transitioning to green energy, I would say there's a chance for us to do it, to have a hybrid solution. We could incorporate green development into our development. However, we do it at our own pace, and we customize it to meet the needs of African states.
Yeah. What is your feeling around the United States now officially returning to the Paris Agreement and the impact that is going to have on the Sustainable Development Goals?
Well, we're welcoming them back to the Paris Agreement Club. I think that they need to take back that leadership. I think that Earth Day initially started with them. The activism around Earth Day began in the United States, and it was for exactly that reason, to protest the pollution due to industrialization in the country. And all of a sudden, by 1990, this movement became a global phenomenon. And of course, they would need to reclaim that position. They would need to take charge and follow through on the agreement in order to lead by example, and while encouraging, not bullying, encouraging the developing world to partake in implementing the agreement.
All right. So you'd like to invite some members of your staff, members of the UJ family, students, but also the general public at large to commemorate Earth Day. So what do I do when I wake up tomorrow? What are some of the things that I can do to participate in the commemoration of this day?
Yes, thank you for that. Well, tomorrow at UJ, we will be walking around the campus and the street and picking up trash. That would be our contribution. We would also be looking to start up a food garden or fruit and veg garden. And I'm encouraging members of the public, UJ staff and students, to, in their own little way, when you see in your immediate environment, please pick up the trash, put them in a trash bin or in a trash bag, tie them up neatly and place them so that the bin collectors could collect them. When you wake up tomorrow, make sure that you conserve energy by switching off your lights. Make sure that you turn off your geyser because you don't need to leave it on the whole day. Make sure that you tidy up, you put your papers, you pick up papers in your immediate environment, put them for recycling. The plastics you can do away with. You don't have to have plastics in your home. Make sure that you plant try gardening, try planting some herbs, some healthy ingredients like ginger and garlic. I mean, it's a COVID-19, we're in a pandemic, and these are ingredients that come in really handy. So you could try in your own way starting a herb garden or starting a fruit and veg garden.
Finally, before we let you go, then there is perception that going green is not profitable. And I know there have been a lot of study done around that to bust that myth. But yourself, I mean, what is your view? What do you lean towards, particularly when it comes to profitability and greening?
I think going green is profitable in the medium to long term. I think in the short term, we would definitely feel the pinch, because that would mean a lot of capital investment in acquiring the technologies, a lot of capital investment if we invested in startups, for instance, in getting them the materials they need to, have more sites for hydroponics, for instance, to combat food insecurity. So that would mean training people, getting them the ability to get the skill needed to work with green technology. So in the short term, there will be a pinch. We will feel the pinch. However, in the medium to long term, it will be beneficial to the African continent at large.
Appreciate your time. Thank you very much for joining us tonight and to raise this awareness on Earth Day and greening or sustainable living. I was the postdoctoral research fellow at the University of Johannesburg Center for Africa-China Studies, Dr. Ekemini Eita Okon.